I would now like to introduce our first featured reader for today, Carter McKenzie. I've known Carter since I first started participating in the Eugene poetry community back in 2012. She's read, helped, and participated in many of my poetry events over the years, including helping to facilitate my first book launch event held right here at Barnes Noble back in 2013, which was a benefit for the Oregon Poetry Association. She's a community activist who also serves on the board of a wonderful cooperative Oregon publishing house. I ask all my featured readers to provide me with a short bio, and this is what Carter sent me. Carter McKenzie's work appears in numerous journals and anthologies, including What the River Brings, Oregon River Poems, Canary, Sisyphus, Turtle Island Quarterly, the Berkeley Poets Cooperative, A History of the Times, and the poetry anthology, Of Course, I'm a Feminist. Along with poet Jenny Root, she co-hosts the Springfield Poetry Series at the Emerald Art Center in Springfield, a co-founder of the Northwest Poetry Collective, Arley Press. Is it Arley or Airly? Airly. I always make that mistake. That's my Airly head. I'm sorry, the co-founder of the Northwest Poetry Collective, Airly Press. Carter continues to support the press as a member of the board of directors. Since 2015, she's been an active member of the Springfield Eugene chapter of SURJ, Showing Up for Racial Justice. Carter lives in a small community in western Oregon's Middle Fork Willamette watershed region, which has been her home for the past 23 years. Stem of Us, released by Flowstone Press in May 2018, is her second full-length book of poetry. So with no further ado, please welcome Carter McKenzie.
Thank you, Stephen. I think it's fine. I think that's good. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with Jenny. I'm very happy that we could read together today. I'm going to try not to knock the mic. I'll also get my... All right. So if the coordinators could let me know if I think my timing's worked out, but I don't want to go over, so just signal if I'm going over. I'm going to share a combination of work from my new book, Stem of Us, and also work that I started beginning in the spring of this past year. And so it'll be a combination of what is included in my book and what is new. And I just want to take a moment to express gratitude for the workshops of Maxine Skates, which Jenny and I have both been in, without which these poems wouldn't exist, I think. They would not exist the way they do. It's been an incredibly important way of learning and writing for me, and I know that this is true for all of us who have worked with Maxine. So I want to thank Maxine. I'm going to start with a quote from Adrienne Rich. This comes from her essay, Permeable Membrane. It's from her book of essays, A Human Eye, Essays on Art and Society. The matter of art enters the bloodstream of social energy, call and response. The empathic imagination can transform, but we can't identify precise loci of transformation, can't track or quantify the moments. Nor can we say how or where they lead through innumerable, unpredictable passageways toward recreating survival, undermining illegitimate power and its cruelties. Poetic imagination is radical, meaning root tangled in the grit of human arrangements and relationships, how we are with each other. And in this sense, I believe all poetry is political. And I think the poems I realize that I have selected tonight, both from my book and from the work that I've done apart from the book, concern that connection between the individual and community and finding that connection through poetry. This poem is called I Want to Live. The epigraph is from Denise Levertoff's poem, In the Woods. Everything is threatened, but meanwhile everything presents itself. I want to live, says the trace of light gleaming on the branch, blossoming with white flowers of wild pears. I want to live, says the trace of rain on the stones before disappearing into the air. And I want to live, say the stones again, in the midst of water, of creeks, the talking mountains, the clamor of stones dividing the waters of the earth. I want to live, say the singing tree frogs in certain seasons of rain before those seasons fade away. Following winter after winter, I want to live, says the sheen of buttercups thick on the curve of the unspectacular hill. The shadows of the lake today rippling dark fir trees, their far delicate green tipped against wide spaces. Sky uninhabited by the departing instincts of flight, the many unseen and subtle adjustments of feathers. I want to live, says the little fishing boat drifting by, caught by accident in this frame. I want to live, says the thread of attention, the depths of the turning and turning, the still alive, journeying fish. Planting milkweed seeds, late October. Gathered near a parking lot while waiting, a gift received later, wrapped in a brown paper napkin, pulled out of a pocket, the wild tufts of the pod, half husk, half shimmer, kept in hand. Small seeds the color of wheat, scattered in dug-up earth, gossamer and seed buried specifically. Faint threads may be interwoven, conversations with strangers while gathering, a part of the sowing, like after the moonrise behind the trees, after the storm, shifting patterns behind my shut eyes. What might be nectar? What might live? Who knows what stays? This poem is about witnessing a kingfisher. And the epigraph for the poem is by Adrienne Rich. The poem is not about, it is out of and to. The sense of movement toward the movement caught. Pausing for the word, the name, toward then. We realize the kingfisher, the flare over the dark slough, toward the shrill cutting of air, among the branches thinning toward the bristle of crown and beak, rattle of song, meaning its own business. Above wake after wake, the slough, surfaces of foraging, communal, restless, the edge of that water particular to how we see each to each, guarded, an edge of ground, a wordless mind of its own, a ground perhaps of hidden nests, an edge toward flight just now, the will to see darkness looking out of itself, our witness toward this going on in the world, of us toward what we love just now. I'm going to read a couple of poems from my book. And the first one is one of the hardest ones. It took the longest time to write this one. And it started from a particular memory, someone is very much in my memory from childhood. And it does concern racism. But as I wrote and worked on this poem, I realized that what was so difficult was the way that it became a reckoning with the function of lynching in a white supremacist society, in which those who were privileged and remained ignorant of those things were part of what perpetuated that function, which was a terrorism not only of individuals in isolated situations, but a terrorism against communities of color. And so that is what became the subject of this poem, the poem Toward. And I do want to mention that on April 26th of this past year, the Equal Justice Initiative opened the National Memorial for Peace and Justice in memory of victims of lynching, and it's the first one that exists in this country. And I think it's stunning. It's been recognized internationally, and I hope that you come check it out. The first epigraph, the epigraph is from Hellhounds by Leon F. Litwack, included in a book called Without Sanctuary, Lynching Photography in America. Between 1882 and 1968, an estimated 4,742 blacks met their deaths at the hands of lynch mobs. As many, if not more, blacks were victims of legal lynchings, speedy trials and executions, private white violence, murdered by a variety of means in isolated rural sections. Of such news, no one's ever said anything in that childhood house, as if all that mattered were going to church and folding napkins so the seams wouldn't show, as if childhood itself were a matter of staying proper and protected, as if everyone had a childhood like ours supposedly was, with birthday cakes and ribbons galore, sweet and simple, as if the woman who had come to work at that house for 25 years with dignity never minded accusations that were almost like family jokes about petty theft, uttered once in a while, under my great-aunt's breath, the door from the dining room to the kitchen swinging shut, again and again, the dishes served again and again, how the woman who came to work never smiled in those rooms. The country she lived in, the country whose rules about theft I didn't know. This poem, which follows, was written out of a sense of history, of reckoning with history, and, a sense of wanting to continue and nurture and heal. So how does that happen? How can that happen? And this is what I was exploring in this poem. It's a praise poem, it's a lament. It's a call to oneself to keep open. And it refers to, in its title, Juneteenth, which is Independence Day. It's the oldest known American holiday commemorating and celebrating the end of slavery. And what happened to begin Juneteenth, June 19th, 1865, was the year 2.5 years after Lincoln's proclamation of emancipation. Slaves, those who had been slaves in Texas, learned of this emancipation 2.5 years later. So that's what this holiday commemorates. And so, in the epigraph is, "Show me the house I must still be living in." And that's from Larry Levis's poem, Elegy with an Angel at Its Gate. In the midst of place, thoughts on Juneteenth. This morning, the pale green bird among the branches of cedar, I have better learned how to see the turning hands of the fringe of leaves, the trace of rain, evidence of light beaded at the tips, fanning out, layers of skirts, layers of shawls, the resin of the smell on my hands this morning, the quiet web of light on the backs of the grasses, along the bent and twisted wire of fences surrounding the garden, a wild rose tree growing out of this home, here, shadows long before me, and morning light, the gold rose that spreads across these foothills, light exposing the raw earth, clear cuts thickly surrounded by trees lined up like matches, little swaths of sprayed land, of Roundup land, blasts of dynamite, land of crow, of red-tailed hawk, of jay, of pileated woodpecker ringing the fallen trees with its beak, rainwater filling the hidden springs, the creeks, the well filling for the use of this house among other wells, the stories, the words, the shadows that filled them at the throats, at the roots of the trees, the underground, interlocking ways I can't see, and I am here by way of others' plans, making possible my own, and this home goes back a long way, to other forests along a different coastline, a different name for opportunity, claimed, cut down, Jamestown, English, Scotch-Irish names given to me, the portraits I passed as a child in those halls, following a grandmother I adored, seeking the sounds of her house, the house of my mother, always the sound of rain on tin, the gaze of the crow in the rain, the voice of my grandmother snapping beans, the woods hiding the trace of a self, traces of stories. My grandmother's mother born in the Shenandoah Valley, orphaned, capable, stitching a child's scalp struck by a stone to stop the bleeding. And still, the vast European reach of diseases, the former slave houses, corridors of sentiment, that backhanded wish. My hand scurrying across a sheet of paper because of and despite what I have learned. Daughter of daughter of daughter, the wild rose, the unbidden, thick-stemmed, red-leafed. I think I have a time for a few more poems right now, Stephen. Is that all right? 3:20.
Yeah, I think you're good.
Okay, so this poem was inspired by reading the work of Terence Hayes and his sequence of called American Sonnet for My Past and Future Assassin, which he started after Trump was elected. And he writes about expanding form, challenging form, and getting at the essence of a form, but not being restricted to its traditional requirements, to be true to the subject. And he writes, sonnets can't start in one position and end with the same position. There has to be a turn. The most interesting thing about the entire project about sonnets is the idea that at some point they did have to turn from a thought to another kind of thought. And that's such a sense of what poetry is. It's a way of finding a container that is also a portal, and that opens up. So this poem came out of a lot of experience of rupture this past year and a desire for healing, but also to be true to what was seen. And I decided to call it reconcile. And the reason I chose that word is because of reconcile having a very early meaning, which means it is to restore to sacred use. And that resonated with me in the subject of this poem. Reconcile. The fawn has disappeared, leaving bones, just beneath the dry grasses, where I will someday be, there, whether beneath earth or within water, somewhere the same quiet of a year, the body thinning to mere grasses, dust, wind, the pale golds of last summer. I don't know how to hold this. I never did. The dark gaze, my witness of that dead eye, her last look, the color of rain gathering in earth, reflecting back the light reflected from sun, one way or another, by moon or not, the daily vanishing. I could brush the grasses away for proof that she was here, and prove nothing except my desire to see the elements. that I remember her gaze in relation to light, the rain's dark pool, her eye, the last look ever happening to her, the little mouth barely open, astonished or in fear. And now they are coming back, returning shadows running at night. They near the water, near their shadow mothers, leaning their heads down to the grasses, down to the water, to drink beneath the trees my parents gave me, reminding me to speak, to tell them, their flame-colored leaves among the summer air's last cool edge, what they meant to give. I'll read one more poem. I think I'll read, actually, a poem about a bear. This is a poem written during a time when bears were showing up quite a bit at my home and in our area, and I feared for their welfare too. But this was a poem about the presence of a bear and a reminder of the continuing cycles. And every time that is detected, I experience it as a blessing. November return. Pregnant and dark, black bear in the cold pre-dawn orchard. Slow moving through rain beneath the backs of mountains. Smelling and eating invisible pears fallen to the ground. Right instinct filling itself in time. Shadow upon shadow without an individual name. Hiding places, she, these, in the distance, clear my mind when I cannot sleep. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carter. Let's give Carter another hand.